I've worked security for over a decade, not because I loved it or had a calling, but because it was easy, steady work. I've done it all. Night shifts at gas stations, weekend gigs at tiny mom and pop stores, overnight watches at construction sites. I thought I'd seen every boring, quiet, uneventful shift you could imagine. That was before the mall. It all started when I stumbled across a job ad online. Night shift security guard wanted, immediate hire, good pay. It wasn't specific about the location at first, but the pay rate was double what I was making. I clicked through, and there it was, my local mall, the big one that sat just outside of town, the one everyone used to go to years ago before half the shops shut down. Lately, it was one of those dying malls, but a paycheck was a paycheck, and I was sick of eating ramen noodles for every meal. I applied, no hesitation. By some stroke of luck, I got a call the very next morning. The manager's voice sounded tired, like a guy who hadn't had a proper night's sleep in years. He introduced himself as Mr. Hensley and asked if I could swing by for a quick interview, this afternoon if possible. It felt a little rushed, but I wasn't about to question it. I needed that job. That afternoon, I drove down to the mall. Even in broad daylight, it looked off. The parking lot was half empty, the few cars parked far away from each other, like even the vehicles didn't want to be too close. The once bright mall sign had missing letters, flickering bulbs. Most of the big stores had gone under, and all that remained were dollar shops, second-rate clothing outlets, and one sad little food court. I brushed it off. Who cared about atmosphere? I was there to work nights, quiet, empty, peaceful. Inside, I met Mr. Hensley. He was a lanky guy, probably in his early 40s, but with bags under his eyes that made him look older. His shirt was wrinkled, tie loosened, like someone constantly on the edge of burning out. The interview was strange. He asked me the usual questions, but it felt like he was just going through the motions, like he was too tired to care about my answers. "Ever worked nights before?" he asked, eyes barely meeting mine. "Plenty," I replied, "mostly gas stations and retail." "Good, good," he nodded, scribbling something on a notepad, not really listening. "Pretty straightforward job. You've got a security office at the back of the building, bunch of camera feeds. Walk the mall once an hour, check every 15 or 30 minutes on the monitors." "Sounds easy enough," I said. And he hesitated, tapping his pen against the desk. "Keep an eye on the escalators in the kids' play area. Sometimes there's activity." I raised an eyebrow, half grinning. "Kids breaking in at night?" He forced a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say you'll figure it out." The part that really set my nerves off was what happened next. There was no paperwork, no ID verification, no "we'll call you in a few days." He just stood up, pulled a set of keys from a drawer, and said, "Think you can start tonight?" I hesitated, just for a second. It was weird, too weird. But then I thought about my overdue rent and the emptiness in my fridge. I swallowed that hesitation, smiled, and said, "Sure." His shoulders relaxed, almost like a weight had been lifted off him. Good, really good. I left, keys in hand, wondering what I had just gotten myself into. When I got home, something gnawed at me. The rushed interview, the way Hensley didn't seem surprised by anything I said, how eager he was to have me start immediately. Still, I chalked it up to short staffing. Most people don't want to work nights in a dead mall. I tried to rest, but my nap was shallow and filled with weird dreams about mannequins moving when I blinked. At 10:45 p.m., I was back in that decaying parking lot, staring at the silent shell of the mall. It was darker now, gloomier. The mall was technically shut down after 9, but the place looked like it hadn't been alive for years. Empty parking spaces stretched endlessly in every direction. I parked near the side entrance Mr. Hensley had mentioned, grabbed my thermos of bad coffee, and walked in. Inside, the smell hit me first. Old mop water, stale air, and something faintly metallic. Mr. Hensley was waiting by the back door, barely mumbling a greeting as he led me through twisting, half-lit service corridors. The way the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered didn't help my growing unease. The security office was small, claustrophobic.
Four walls pressed in tight around rows of outdated monitors stacked on metal shelves. The footage on the screens was grainy, static dancing in the corners of every feed. Stores sat dark and abandoned. Escalators stood frozen mid-step like snapped spines. The play area was a patch of bright colors that looked more sinister in the dim light.
"Same rules as we talked about," Mr. Hensley muttered, handing me a printed list of the official duties. "Check cameras, do your rounds, keep it basic, stay awake." I nodded, but as he turned to leave, he paused. "Oh, and about the escalators and play area. Don't ignore anything weird, all right? Check in every hour." I wanted to ask more, but before I could, he was gone. I sat there alone, feeling like the walls were pushing closer by the second. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee and cycled through the camera feeds. The emptiness felt thicker on screen than it did in person. Even the smallest movement in the footage made me jump, though it was usually just a flickering light or a camera glitch. I must have been staring too hard, because when I leaned back, I felt a presence behind me, heavy, uncomfortable. I spun around so fast I nearly fell off my chair. "Jesus," I muttered, clutching my chest. It was a janitor, or at least someone dressed like one. Older guy, gray in his beard, leaning casually in the doorway with a knowing smile. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, voice rough but friendly. "You're the new night guy, right?" I nodded, catching my breath. "Yeah, first night." His grin widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll need this." From his back pocket, he pulled out a worn, crumpled piece of paper, edges yellowed and stained like it had been passed around too many times. "List of, let's call them survival tips," he said, pressing it into my hand. "You follow these, you'll make it to sunrise." I stared at the paper, confused. "More rules?" "Not from management," he said, wiping his hands on his uniform. "From experience. Trust me, guys who don't follow them, they don't come back." Something about his tone sent a chill through me. I unfolded the paper. Rule 1. Check cameras every 15-30 minutes. Don't stare too long. Rule 2. Don't look directly at mannequins after midnight. If they move, leave. Rule 3. Never listen to voices from closed stores. Rule 4. If the clock moves backward, get to the office fast. Rule 5. If the escalator runs after midnight, don't go near it. Rule 6. Don't open the door to anyone between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. Rule 7. Don't look in mirrors after midnight. Rule 8. Ignore any crying near dressing rooms. Rule 9. Never leave before 6 a.m. There were more scribbled in messy handwriting at the bottom, half-legible warnings about mirrors, reflections, strange tapping sounds. But my stomach was already tying itself into knots. "You're serious?" I asked, half laughing. The janitor's smile vanished. His eyes darkened, jaw tightening. "Dead serious," he said quietly. "Last guy didn't last more than a night." I swallowed, hard. "Have a good shift," he said, turning on his heel and walking away. I watched his back until he disappeared down a side corridor, his footsteps fading into silence. I sat there, gripping the cursed piece of paper like it might bite me. And just like that, my uneventful, boring nights were officially over. Sleep never came easy after my first shift at that mall. My body felt like it had been crushed by some unseen weight. And every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the faint knocking from the security office door, the groaning escalators, the whispers curling in my ears. But I was broke, and money makes people do dumb things. Dumb, like showing up for a second shift. The second night, I stood once again in front of the decrepit entrance. The parking lot stretched empty before me, the dark glass doors reflecting my haggard expression back at me. This time, there was no Mr. Hensley to greet me, no janitor. Just silence and that gut-clenching wrongness the building seemed to ooze from every crack. The keys felt heavier in my hand, like they didn't want to be used.
My footsteps echoed sharply down the lifeless corridors as I made my way to the office, the same paper-thin walls pressing in closer than the night before. The cameras blinked their dull, flickering eyes at me as I settled into the same uncomfortable chair. I placed the janitor's crumpled survival list on the desk, flattening it out carefully, like it was a holy relic that might protect me from what waited inside the walls. The first few minutes passed quietly. No moving mannequins, no flickering lights that didn't belong. I almost let myself relax. Almost. Then I checked camera 4, the feed that pointed directly at the children's play area. My stomach flipped. The little carousel in the corner was spinning. I blinked, leaned in. There was no one there. The carousel's little painted horses bobbed up and down slowly, cheerfully, like they hadn't been left abandoned for years. The colorful lights blinked in slow circles, shadows dancing along the floor around it. "Nope," I muttered, slamming back into my chair, eyeing Rule 5 on the paper. "Don't go near it." I flipped to camera 9, focusing on the main escalator. Dead still. Good. I made a note to avoid that section entirely on my first patrol. I grabbed the flashlight and hesitated by the office door, every instinct in me screaming to stay put. But a little voice in the back of my head whispered, "You need this job. Rent doesn't pay itself." I stepped out. The corridor swallowed me whole. The air was thicker than the night before, mustier. Every sound seemed to travel too far, like someone was trailing me just out of sight. My footsteps thudded softly as I made my rounds, flashlight slicing through the inky black ahead of me. I passed storefronts where mannequins stood frozen, dressed in clothes no one would ever buy, behind windows no one would ever look through. I didn't stare at them long. Rule 2 had drilled itself into my brain. My route led me past the old food court. I quickened my pace, head down, not wanting to see if the soda machines blinked or if the fryers coughed up oily smoke. Then I heard it, a soft hum, a child's giggle, echoing faintly from the carousel's direction. My steps faltered. "Ignore it," I whispered to myself, jaw clenched tight. "Keep moving." I finished my round faster than any respectable security guard should have, practically jogging back to the office. My breaths came out sharp, but the chair welcomed me like an old friend. I checked the cameras. The carousel had stopped. The mannequins looked as lifeless as ever. The clock ticked forward. Then, camera 6, the back hallway near the restrooms, flickered. A figure stood there, head pressed against the wall. Hair black and stringy, dress pale and clinging to thin limbs. My hand trembled as I panned the camera slightly. She wasn't moving, just pressed to the wall, like listening for something on the other side. I swallowed. Rule 8, don't acknowledge the crying woman near the dressing rooms. This wasn't the dressing rooms, but it was close enough. My skin crawled as I cycled to the next feed. Out of sight, out of mind. Don't invite it in. The hours crawled. Every 15 minutes I checked the cameras, each time catching some new oddity. Mannequins tilted in new directions, elevator doors opening and closing to no one. That woman occasionally shifting spots, standing at new hallways, her head still pressed to the wall, like she was listening for my breath through the cameras. By 3:45 a.m., the air turned colder, heavier. My fingers were numb, my coffee lukewarm and bitter. I stared at the clock, remembering Rule 6, don't open the door to anyone between 4 and 4:30 a.m. The knock came early. 3 solid bangs on the office door at 3:50. "Security," a voice called. "Janitor here. Need to check the boiler room. Open up." My mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed to open that door, that it was the janitor from before. Maybe he had come back. Maybe I wouldn't have to sit here in this prison alone. But Rule 6 stabbed at me like a blade. The knocking grew louder, more urgent. I said, "Open the door," the voice growled, deeper now, less human. I backed away from the door, heart hammering, grabbing my flashlight like it could fend off whatever was on the other side. The cameras flickered to static. The clock on the wall jerked backward. 3:58, 3:54, 3:50. Rule 4. If time moves backward, get to the office fast. I was already in the office. Where could I go? The door handle jiggled violently. My radio crackled to life with static. Then a whispering voice, hissing my name. My back hit the far wall, breathing shallow, pulse thundering in my ears. The knocking stopped. The clock leapt forward to 4:31. Cameras blinked back to life, showing quiet halls, frozen mannequins, a dead carousel. No woman in the hallway. I sat there, clutching my chest, body shaking until sunrise. At exactly 6 a.m., the side door creaked open, and Mr. Hensley strode in, cheerful as ever, like nothing in the world was wrong. "Another night down," he smiled. "You're doing great. We'll see you tomorrow?" I could barely nod, too exhausted to process it all. But inside, I knew one thing. Tomorrow night would be worse. When I returned for the third night, I genuinely questioned my sanity. My body ached in ways I hadn't felt since my 20s, and my mind felt ragged, stretched too thin. Sleep had been little more than brief moments of tortured dozing, every second punctuated by phantom knocks and flickering memories of mannequins moving when they shouldn't. I stood in the parking lot longer than I should have, watching the sleeping mall swallow the last hints of daylight. The sky was murky, clouds curling over the black outline of the mall's jagged rooftop. My hand hovered over my car keys, the lingering voice in my head urging me to leave. But there's something about death that can make a person ignore every primal instinct. I grabbed the keys and trudged toward the side entrance. The silence inside was somehow deeper tonight. The corridors seemed tighter, the stale air more suffocating. My flashlight seemed dimmer, even after changing the batteries. Every light bulb overhead buzzed like dying insects. My footsteps sounded too loud in the vacant halls. I made it to the office, locking the door with extra force. The same camera feeds blinked to life, but tonight, even they seemed darker. I unfolded the janitor's note again. The same brutal list of rules stared back at me, each sentence branding itself deeper into my brain. The first 30 minutes passed uneventfully, and a dangerous part of me started thinking maybe I was adapting, getting used to the horrors. But then, camera 5, one of the old abandoned department stores, flickered to static before clearing again. I leaned in, eyes narrowing. A figure stood in the far end of the store, too distant to see details, but unmistakable. Someone or something was there, staring directly at the camera. It didn't move, didn't blink, just loomed in the shadows. I swallowed hard, checking the other cameras. Everything else seemed normal, just that one thing standing there, completely still. I quickly cycled away, not wanting to break Rule 1, don't stare too long. Determined not to fall into the trap of terror, I took a few deep breaths and started my first round, flashlight trembling in my grip. The moment I stepped out of the office, the atmosphere wrapped around me like a thick shroud. The air felt heavier, thick with moisture. The hallway lights flickered more aggressively. As I passed the old shoe store, a loud scraping noise stopped me cold. My flashlight snapped toward the sound, heart hammering in my chest. One of the mannequins stood just beyond the glass display, its head tilted slightly, its plastic fingers now pressed against the glass. I forced my gaze away, walking faster, repeating to myself, "Don't look, don't engage." The food court was worse tonight. Tables were overturned, chairs arranged in strange spirals, like someone or something had been playing with them. I kept my head down, pushing through, and reached the escalators. They were moving. I didn't need to check my watch to know it was after midnight. The steps groaned, moving upward with a jerky, mechanical rhythm. Rule 5 burned in my head: do not investigate the escalator. I turned sharply, heading in the opposite direction, but the sound followed me. The rhythmic click-clack, the unnatural hum, it echoed louder the further I tried to get away. I managed to make it back to the office without glancing back, slamming the door shut, heart pounding like a jackhammer. The escalator stopped. Silence returned, but only for a moment. The radio on the desk crackled to life, followed by a low static hum, then soft breathing. I froze. It wasn't my breathing, it was someone else's, labored, wet, and far too close. "Come, check the back hall," a voice finally whispered, distorted but feminine. "Something's wrong. You need to come now." Every hair on my neck stood on end. I checked camera 6, the back hall. Sure enough, the crying woman stood there, her head pressed against the cold wall, her back arched like she was struggling to stay upright. Her arms moved unnaturally, twitching as though bones bent in directions they shouldn't. "Nope," I whispered sharply, turning off the radio and cycling away from the camera. Then came the knocking, so violent it shook the door in its frame. I lunged to check the hallway feed outside the office. Empty, no one there. But the door kept rattling like it would break off the hinges. "Open the door," hissed a deep, guttural voice. "It's Mr. Hensley." I stumbled back from the door, clutching the janitor's note like it was a lifeline. The cameras blurred, the lights in the office dimmed, and time twisted again. 2:43, 2:38, 2:30. I pressed myself into the corner, flashlight useless, praying silently for the time to skip ahead, for the dawn to come, for any reprieve from this madness. Eventually, the knocking stopped. The lights flickered back to full power. The clock jumped forward to 3:12. Camera feeds returned to their usual bleak quietude. But the damage was done. My nerves felt shredded, every muscle tensed like coiled springs. I sat glued to the chair, eyes never leaving the cameras, waiting for the next nightmare to crawl out of the shadows. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. The mall was alive, seething, playing games with me, bending time and space like a sadistic puppet master. And I was its trapped little marionette, counting down the hours until daylight saved me again, if it ever truly did. By my fourth night, any illusion of normalcy was obliterated. The thought of stepping back into that mall felt like volunteering for some private purgatory. But the grim weight of responsibility and a paycheck I still desperately needed forced me back through those cursed doors. It was raining that evening. Sheets of water hammered the parking lot, distorting the neon reflections into bleeding colors across the pavement. I sat in my car for a while longer than usual, letting the wipers rhythmically scrape across the windshield, as if they could wipe away the dread settling into my bones. The rain seemed to fit the mood of the place, washed out, cold, lifeless. When I finally stepped out, the wind cut through my jacket like knives. The mall stood silent, brooding in the storm's gloom, its enormous bulk pressing down on me even before I touched the entrance handle. Inside, the air was damp, like mildew had made its permanent home in the walls. The faint hum of old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some flickering like the dying heartbeat of a long-dead beast. My boots squeaked against the polished floor as I headed toward the office, my every instinct screaming for me to turn back and leave. The janitor was waiting for me. I stopped dead in my tracks. His silhouette was unmistakable, leaning casually against the vending machine near the security office door. His mop rested beside him, untouched. "You're still alive," he remarked dryly, voice carrying that same unnerving hollow edge. "Against all odds," I muttered back, tightening my grip on my flashlight. "It gets worse before it gets different," he said, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You brought the note?" I tapped my pocket. "Haven't let it go since the first night." "Good," he replied, and without another word, He vanished around the corner, like smoke, like a shadow too tired to cling to the light. The security office was exactly how I left it. The clock, cursed as it was, blinked 10:59 p.m. as I shut the door behind me. The monitors flickered to life, static-ridden, the familiar dread seeping in like poison through my veins. I ran my hand down my face, already exhausted before the shift had truly begun. It started at 12:15. Camera 8, positioned just outside the now defunct arcade, crackled violently before clearing to reveal the hallway. There was no one there at first. Then a child's ball rolled into frame, bouncing gently against the wall, stopping perfectly centered in front of the camera. My mouth went dry. Then the laughter started, soft, innocent, childlike. The speakers on the wall crackled with a sickly sweet sound, louder, louder, until it no longer sounded like laughter, but like something mimicking laughter, something that didn't quite understand how happiness sounded. "Rule 6, I whispered aloud. If you hear a child laughing from the play area, leave immediately. I stood from my chair, legs weak and unwilling, and cracked the door open, glancing both ways before stepping into the hallway. The sound was louder now, echoing down the empty corridor, bouncing off the lifeless storefronts. I didn't dare glance toward the play area. My route backtracked, away from the sound, toward the receiving area in the rear of the mall. The air grew colder the further I walked, my breath misting before me despite the heavy jacket. The laughter faded, replaced by something worse, complete silence. It was the kind of silence that seemed to press against your ears, like standing too deep underwater. Then came the scratching. I spun, flashlight swinging, illuminating nothing but empty hallways. Yet the scratching persisted, rhythmic, like nails clawing at wood. I kept moving, steps quickening, heart galloping in my chest. Whatever it was, it wanted me to stop, to turn around. I refused. I reached the receiving area's locked double doors, fumbling with my keys, all too aware of the soft dragon footsteps that had joined the scratching now. I risked one glance back, mistake number one. Down the hallway, silhouetted by the flickering emergency light, was a mannequin. It was halfway into the corridor, where none had been before. Arms bent at awkward angles, head snapped to the side as if listening, its plastic form blocking my exit path. "Eyes forward," I muttered to myself, unlocking the doors and slipping through into the delivery dock. The heavy doors closed with a resounding thud behind me. The scratching vanished, replaced by the low hum of the aging ventilation system. For a brief moment, I allowed myself a shaky breath of relief. Then came the music box. It started faintly, a haunting, tinny melody drifting through the stale air, growing louder with each passing second. My stomach twisted itself into knots. I scanned the dimly lit area, finding the source, one of the old, broken vending machines. The song was distorted, as if someone had recorded it underwater, but the tone itself was unmistakably a lullaby. I approached despite myself, every nerve in my body screaming in protest. The machine's digital display blinked sporadically, its buttons worn and cracked. The song grew louder the closer I got, until it abruptly cut off just as I stood before it. The machine powered down, its display going completely blank. I backed away slowly, turning back toward the doors, only to find them slightly ajar. I had locked them, of that I was sure. My fingers trembled as I pushed the door open and stepped back into the corridor. It was wrong. The whole hallway was wrong. The ceiling seemed lower, the tiles stretched and distorted like I had stepped into a funhouse mirror. The lights were dimmer, shadows thicker. I checked my watch. 2:11 a.m. Then blinked. 1:58 a.m. "No," I whispered fiercely, turning back toward the office, pacing fast, not running but quick enough to make my limbs ache. Rule 4 screamed inside my head. If the time ever goes backward, return to the office immediately. I ignored the mannequins now, the ones that watched from store windows, some pressed close to the glass as though wanting to burst free. I ignored the soft knocks that rattled storefront shutters and the disembodied whispers that trailed me from shadows. I kept my focus singular, reached the office, locked myself inside, survived the night. The camera feeds were worse upon my return. Several simply didn't work, replaced by static and high-pitched ringing that threatened to split my skull. The few that did function showed things I didn't want to understand. Mannequins standing in places they didn't belong, shadows moving without cause, things crawling along the ceilings. I huddled into the chair, curling into myself like some child hiding from monsters under the blankets. Except the monsters were real here, and the walls were thin. The next few hours stretched like elastic, every second threatening to snap. The rules became my religion, my shield against the unknown. I didn't glance out the office door despite the gentle tapping of what sounded like the janitor's mop. I didn't investigate the muffled sobbing that emanated from the camera outside the women's restroom. I refused to look at the monitor that kept glitching between my own reflection and something with far too many teeth grinning back at me. Then, at 5:59, everything stopped. The knocking ceased. The cameras blinked back to normal. The twisted corridors uncoiled themselves. Time corrected. The mall exhaled. And when Mr. Hensley appeared at the office door, his knock gentle, his voice tired but human, I almost wept with relief. The fourth night was over, but the damage was permanent. My skin felt thinner, my mind more fragile. And through it all, one horrifying realization crystallized in my thoughts. The mall wasn't just haunted, it was hungry, and I was on the menu.
The air in the security office remained dense and heavy, the silence occasionally broken by the faint hum of distant machinery. It was nearing the final stretch of my shift, but every second dragged on like an eternity. The rules had kept me alive so far, but I was painfully aware of how easily one mistake could mean the end. I kept my eyes glued to the monitors, wary of every flicker, every shadow. The mall's darkness seemed alive, shifting and restless beyond the sterile glow of the security office. I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still waiting for me. The clock blinked, 5:01 a.m. 59 more minutes. Just one more hour and I would walk out of this nightmare for good. But I couldn't relax, not yet. My nerves were shot, my muscles stiff, my mind fraying at the edges. The events of the night replayed in my head. The mannequin that moved, the ghostly woman in the mirror, the time that rewound, the laughter, the knocking, the voices pretending to be familiar faces. Every sound, every movement, every flickering image felt like a trap, and I couldn't afford to slip up now. I reviewed the rules again. I'd memorized them by now, every line seared into my brain. Every rule had already saved my life tonight. Then, out of nowhere, one of the monitors cut to static. Camera 14, the back hallway by the freight elevator, was just a wall of white noise. My hands tightened on the desk's edge. Flickering, the image returned for a brief second, revealing a tall, narrow figure standing in front of the elevator doors. The figure was just out of the camera's light, but its elongated limbs and unnatural posture were enough to make my skin crawl. Then static again. No rule mentioned the freight elevator. My thoughts raced. Was this a test? A new rule? My gut screamed to stay in the office, but part of me whispered it might be a camera malfunction, something mundane. My job, after all, was to monitor the mall, to protect it. I checked the other cameras. The figure didn't appear on any of them, only that one camera in the back hallway. I flipped back and forth, but the static persisted, the figure's brief appearance etched into my mind. A metallic clang rang out through the speakers, harsh, sharp, echoing through the mall's emptiness. It came from the direction of the freight elevator.
My throat went dry. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, even though I knew no one would answer. "Is anyone there?" I asked into the void, my voice barely more than a whisper. Nothing but static responded. I glanced at the clock, 5:09 a.m. I could stay put, just wait it out. But what if this was the type of thing that got worse when ignored? The janitor, whatever he was, warned me the rules kept you alive, but he never said ignoring other things wouldn't make them worse. Another metallic bang, louder this time, followed by the gut-churning sound of scraping, something heavy dragging across concrete. My fists clenched. I had no rule for this. I was flying blind. Grabbing the flashlight, I cursed under my breath and stepped into the hallway, locking the security door behind me. The corridor stretched out ahead, long and suffocatingly silent. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, bouncing back at me as though something else walked alongside me, mocking every movement. I made my way past the shuttered storefronts, their mannequins frozen in unnatural poses behind the glass, their featureless faces turned away from me. I kept my eyes forward, my hand trembling slightly as I gripped the flashlight. Closer to the back hallway, the air grew colder, sharper, as if each breath carved into my lungs. Then I heard it again, dragging, scraping, a deep metallic groan that seemed to vibrate through the floor beneath my feet. I reached the corner that turned into the freight hallway, pausing before stepping into the open. Slowly, I peered around the corner. The hallway was empty. No figures, no movement, just long, flickering lights casting weak pulls of illumination on the concrete floor. Except the freight elevator door stood slightly open, the inside cloaked in pitch darkness. I approached carefully, the light trembling in my grip. The metal floor of the elevator was scuffed and stained, claw marks gouging the surface. Then the door creaked, inching open just a little wider. A cold draft oozed from the elevator's depths, accompanied by a foul stench of rot and mildew. My instincts screamed at me to back away, to return to the office, but my fate remained rooted.
A whisper drifted from inside, my name, distorted and wet, slithering into my ears. My blood froze. I stepped back instinctively, forcing my body to retreat. The doors began to close slowly, grinding against unseen resistance. But before they shut completely, I caught a final glimpse. Two hollow, white eyes peering from the darkness, fixed entirely on me. I bolted. Every step back to the office felt like miles, the oppressive air thickening with every heartbeat. When I finally reached the door, I slammed it shut and locked it, leaning against it with every ounce of my strength. I checked the monitors. The camera feed to the freight elevator was back online. Doors fully closed, hallway empty, nothing moving. My watch ticked, 5:23 a.m. My heart hammered in my chest, but I had survived this far. No more heroics. I would ride out the remaining time in this office, glued to the rules. As the minutes crawled forward, the eerie noises faded, replaced by a suffocating silence. No more laughter, no more knocking, no mannequins moving in the corner of my eye. Just endless, quiet waiting. Finally, at 6 a.m., the first hints of daylight broke through the high windows, casting long beams of warmth into the corridors. The oppressive atmosphere loosened its grip. The cameras showed nothing but stillness. At exactly 6:05 a.m., I heard footsteps, normal footsteps, followed by a knock. "Shift's over," Mr. Hensley's voice called out, calm, human, familiar. I checked the monitors. There he was, alone, looking tired but normal. I opened the door, and for the first time in hours, breathed freely. I didn't wait for chit-chat. I turned in my key and left, the morning sun blinding but comforting. As I drove away, I cast one last glance at the building in my rearview mirror, feeling its dead, watchful eyes on me. I survived, but I would never go back. Some buildings don't sleep. Some places refuse to let go. And that mall, it would forever remain a hungry, breathing nightmare hidden behind glass storefronts and escalators, waiting for the next fool to wander in. Not me. Never again.